July 2026. The summer heat presses against the glass of multiplexes from Los Angeles to London. Inside, the theaters are packed. A familiar green ogre fills the screen. Shrek 5 has arrived. 16 years have passed since the last mainline film, a silence that felt permanent in an era defined by endless sequels. Yet here they are. Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, Cameron Diaz, the original cast reassembled and deployed. The box office numbers flash across industry terminals, breaking records, dominating the global cultural conversation. It looks like a sudden, spontaneous return to cinematic magic. It is not. The 16-year hiatus was never a creative delay. It was a precise, calculated financial mechanism. In the modern entertainment economy, time is a weapon. Universal Pictures did not forget about Shrek. They buried him intentionally. They placed the intellectual property into a state of suspended animation, waiting for a very specific demographic clock to run down. The children who watched the original Shrek in 2001 are now in their 30s. They have acquired disposable income. More importantly, they have acquired children of their own. This is the generational nostalgia trap. It is the most powerful economic mechanism in modern Hollywood. When a studio reboots a dormant franchise exactly one generation later, they bypass the traditional risks of theatrical distribution. They instantly activate a high-margin ecosystem of merchandising, streaming retention, and theme park integration. Universal is using this calculated timeline to wage a shadow war against Disney for dominance over the entire physical and digital entertainment landscape. Shrek 5 is not just a movie. It is a multi-billion-dollar asset deployment. To understand how Universal built this trap, we have to look away from the theaters of 2026. We must examine the architecture of the IP lifecycle, the hidden math of memory, and the operational decisions that turned a cynical fairy tale into a financial empire.
To understand the leverage Universal holds in 2026, we have to trace the mechanism back to its origin. In the late 1990s, the animation industry was a monopoly. Walt Disney Feature Animation owned the cultural definition of childhood. Their formula was rigid, tested, and immensely profitable. Earnest princesses, clear morality, sweeping musical numbers, and absolute sincerity. Competing with Disney on their own terms was corporate suicide. Jeffrey Katzenberg knew this better than anyone. He here architected the Disney Renaissance, overseeing The Little Mermaid and The Lion King. When he was forced out of Disney in 1994, he co-founded DreamWorks SKG with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen. Katzenberg needed a weapon to fracture Disney's monopoly. He found it in a fractured fairy tale. In 2001, DreamWorks released Shrek. It was not a tribute to the fairy tale genre. It was an assassination attempt. Shrek weaponized irony. It deployed adult humor, pop culture references, and a cynical edge that actively mocked Disney's earnestness. The financial impact was immediate and staggering. Shrek grossed $484 million globally on a $60 million budget. It won the first ever Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. It saved DreamWorks from financial ruin. But the true paradigm shift arrived 3 years later. Shrek 2 opened in 2004 and grossed $928 million. It proved that irony scaled. DreamWorks transformed from a fledgling studio into an industrial production line for pop culture-heavy animation. They established a new paradigm, forcing the entire industry to adapt to their tone. However, the operational reality of Hollywood dictates that every engine eventually burns out. DreamWorks pushed the throttle too hard. They released Shrek the Third in 2007 and Shrek Forever After in 2010. The box office returns remained high, but the cultural capital began to plummet. Franchise fatigue set in. The irony had become predictable. The brand was diluting. Recognizing the math of diminishing returns, the studio labeled the fourth film The Final Chapter. The property was put on ice. By 2016, DreamWorks Animation was struggling to maintain its independence against massive media conglomerates. In April of that year, Comcast's NBC Universal purchased DreamWorks Animation for $3.8 billion. They did not buy the studio for its current slate of films. They bought the vault. Universal executives looked at the dormant Shrek franchise and saw an unexploited mechanism. The prevailing wisdom in Hollywood at the time was constant output. Keep the characters in the public eye. Release a television spin-off, a holiday special, a mobile game.
keep the intellectual property active. Universal made a contrarian operational decision. They looked at the demographic data. The primary audience for the original films was born between 1990 and 2000. In 2016, that cohort was in their early 20s. They were too old to buy toys and too young to have children. Reactivating the franchise then would yield marginal returns. Instead, Universal chose forced scarcity. They allowed the Shrek brand to transition from active entertainment into internet folklore. Shrek became a meme. The character lived on through absurd internet humor, quietly sustaining brand awareness at zero cost to Universal's marketing department. The studio deliberately shelved the core theatrical franchise. They established a rigid waiting period.
They would not touch the mainline story until exactly one generation had passed. They were waiting for the 2001 audience to reach their peak spending years. They were building a financial dam, letting the pressure of nostalgia build behind it. This was the blind spot of the industry. While competitors frantically pumped out content to feed new streaming services, Universal let their most valuable asset sleep. The decision to wait is fundamentally a calculation of risk. In the 2020s, the theatrical business is hostile terrain. Original intellectual property fails at a staggering rate. Launching an unknown concept requires tens of millions of dollars in marketing just to establish baseline awareness. Dormant legacy IP subverts this equation. When Universal begins the internal development of Shrek 5, they are operating with a marketing floor that already spans the globe. The awareness is built in. The executives overseeing the Universal machine view nostalgia not as an emotion, but as a predictable demographic asset. The mechanics of the IP lifecycle are mathematically rigid. A consumer forms a primary emotional attachment to a brand between the ages of 7 and 12. 15 to 20 years later, that consumer enters the workforce. 25 years later, they dictate the entertainment choices of a new household. Universal's strategy targets this exact 25-year interval. By 2026, the millennial generation controls the vast majority of family entertainment spending. They are the gatekeepers. If Universal can trigger their nostalgia, they automatically secure the viewership of their children. It is a 2-for-1 demographic strike. But theatrical revenue is only the surface of the mechanism. The true motives behind Shrek 5 lie in the downstream architecture of the modern media conglomerate. Universal needs high-margin multipliers. The first multiplier is streaming. NBC Universal's Peacock platform requires massive, exclusive retention drivers to prevent subscriber churn. A new Shrek film acts as a gravitational pull, dragging users into the ecosystem and locking them into the back catalog. The second and far more lucrative multiplier is physical infrastructure. In 2025, Universal opened Epic Universe, a multi-billion-dollar theme park expansion in Orlando designed to challenge Disney World's supremacy. Theme parks are capital-intensive machines that require constant cultural relevance to justify their pricing power. Shrek is deeply integrated into Universal's global park strategy. Releasing a mainline sequel in 2026 acts as a massive self-funding advertisement for the physical parks. Every ticket sold in a theater translates directly to hotel bookings and merchandise sales in Florida and Osaka. To execute this mechanism perfectly, Universal needed the original components. A recast would break the nostalgia spell. The studio engaged in quiet, extensive negotiations to secure Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, and Cameron Diaz. They also sought to bridge the generational gap, courting massive modern stars like Zendaya to anchor the secondary cast, ensuring Gen Z engagement alongside millennial nostalgia. The studio is not funding art. They are engineering a bridge between past memories and future recurring revenue. The Dormant IP is the cheapest, most effective building material available.
The Shadow War breaks into the open in the summer of 2026. The conflict is not fought on screen, but on balance sheets and release calendars. Universal's deployment of Shrek 5 is a direct assault on the vulnerabilities of the Walt Disney Company. For a decade, Disney defined the modern franchise model through aggressive, continuous output. They purchased Marvel and Star Wars and immediately accelerated production. They flooded theaters and their Disney Plus streaming service with interconnected stories. For years, this strategy generated historic profits. But by the mid-2020s, the physics of oversupply took effect. The sheer volume of content degraded the prestige of the brands. Marvel films began experiencing 40% drops in per-film profitability. Star Wars retreated from theaters entirely to recalibrate. Disney had mined their intellectual property so aggressively that they had stripped the soil of its nutrients. Universal watched this degradation and executed the exact opposite strategy. They weaponized scarcity. The 16-year gap between Shrek Forever After and Shrek 5 was transformed from a lapse into a marketing event. When Universal drops the first trailer in early 2026, the internet fractures. The algorithmic response is unprecedented. Because the franchise had been starved of official content for over a decade, the pent-up demand detonates instantly. The studio does not need to explain the premise or introduce the characters. The marketing campaign is aggressively simple. They are back. Universal locks in a July 2026 release date, planting a flag in the most lucrative corridor of the summer box office. They force rival studios to scatter. Nobody wants to counter-program against a generational event. The execution of the rollout is a masterclass in synchronized corporate synergy. Weeks before the theatrical premiere, Universal updates the Shrek attractions at their global theme parks. They flood retail channels with a highly calibrated mix of merchandise, premium, expensive collectibles targeted at nostalgic adults, and standard toys targeted at their children. They leverage their broadcast networks to run retrospectives. The entire Comcast machine aligns to push one single green asset. The climax arrives on the opening weekend. Theaters report sold-out screens across thousands of locations. The demographic breakdown at the ticket counter reveals the perfection of the trap. The audience is split evenly between adults aged 30 to 45 attending without children and families with young kids. Universal has successfully monetized the past and the present simultaneously. The opening weekend grosses shatter industry projections. The numbers validate Universal's central thesis. Managed nostalgia, deployed at the precise generational interval, is mathematically superior to continuous dilutive output. Disney watches as Universal steals the cultural oxygen. The tension in boardrooms across Hollywood spikes. The success of Shrek 5 creates a dangerous new precedent. It proves that studios do not need to invent new icons to dominate the modern economy. They simply need to hoard their old ones and wait for the audience to age. The conflict between creative risk and IP management is resolved permanently in favor of management. Universal has mapped this human life cycle and turned it into a business plan. The victory is total, but the collateral damage is the nature of cinema itself. The multiplex is no longer a place to discover the unknown.
It is a highly optimized echo chamber, designed to feed us our own memories at a premium price. Universal did not just win the summer of 2026. They proved that the future of the entertainment industry is just a perfectly timed repetition of its past. The dust settles on the summer of 2026, leaving a permanently altered landscape. The staggering financial yield of Shrek 5 confirms a dark reality about the modern economy. Nostalgia is no longer an organic human emotion. It is an asset class. It can be quantified, scheduled, and extracted. Universal Pictures demonstrated that a studio does not need to predict what the culture will want tomorrow. They only need to rigorously track what the culture loved 20 years ago and serve it back to them when they are most vulnerable to the passage of time. The IP lifecycle is now a solved equation. The implications stretch far beyond a single animation franchise. Every major media conglomerate is now auditing their vaults, calculating the precise age of their dormant properties. They are mapping the demographic coordinates of millennials, Gen Z, and Generation Alpha, plotting the exact years when their childhood memories will be ripe for financial harvest. The entertainment economy has become a closed loop. The risk of the new is entirely replaced by the safety of the familiar. Universal won its battle against Disney by proving that forced scarcity and weaponized memory are the ultimate commercial shields. They protected their margins, they drove attendance to their theme parks, they stabilized